9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the mothership, Deep State Radio. Usually it's a few of us sitting around here, your old friends. This time it's just me, David Rothkopf, and another of our OGs, Ed Luce. How you doing, Ed?
I'm doing reasonably well, thank you, David. And we're going to have to talk a lot.
But yes, well, Corey was going to join us, and she had a last-minute emergency. But you wrote a good column today. Why don't we start with that?
I think that's always a brilliant starting point for any kind of conversation in any situation.
Yeah, I thought Morning Joe should have devoted the whole show to it today.
I'm looking at the column looks at the fact that essentially this is a dead heat. You look at, I don't think I've ever seen all the swing states being basically 50-50 for this amount of time, and they might jump a couple of points either way. And then the probabilistic models, which I don't give too much credence to, but the Nate Silvers, etc. One day they've got Trump winning, the next Harris winning. There's absolutely nothing in this. And if you cast your mind back to 2016, that wasn't the case. The polls and the probabilistic models had Hillary Clinton winning. So, I guess the advantage of this time is knowledge of that. There is paranoia, and only the paranoid survive. And that just gives the Harris campaign a different level, of vigor and energy than what we saw from Hillary in 2016. So that's the pretty faint silver lining that I would derive from these numbers, which are dead heat territory.
Yeah, well, that's, interesting. I wrote a Substack. I wrote my Daily Beast column today on Trump losing it, and I'll get to that in a second. But my Substack from yesterday was a sort of look at the Harris campaign. And one of the points that I made, based on conversations with experts, not my own view, because I'm certainly not that, is that about 60, maybe 70 polls in the past 3 weeks have been politically motivated polls that are dubious. Rasmussen, but other polls that are in that variety that are all sort of skewed towards Trump, primarily so that Trump can make the case that it was close or he was ahead and that he was cheated, whatever the result was at the end. Also, the Trump campaign has embraced the idea of saying they're close or they're ahead, whereas the the Harris campaign is kind of divided between people who want to point out that she's doing pretty well and others who want, to play to your only the paranoid survive theme. But if you look at other things, fundraising, volunteers, registrations, early voting, including yesterday's historic number in Georgia, all of those cut in Harris's favor. There were two credible polls in the past 24 hours that both had Harris up in the 4 or 5% range nationally and up in the blue wall states. And so, the question is, do you ever allow yourself to be, I know you're a completely nonpartisan person, but Donald Trump is, kind of going to destroy the country. So do you ever allow yourself to be optimistic?
I do sometimes. I mean, I was optimistic in 2020, really, for the previous year. It was clear to me Trump was losing. And I remember writing about it and people saying, don't get ahead of yourself. So sometimes I'm capable of optimism.
Well, Trump is losing his marbles. He's behaving bizarrely. When he's coherent, he's extreme. And the rest of the time, most of the time, he's incoherent. Don't you think that may suggest he's losing it now?
I think him losing it, colloquially, his mind, and him losing the election are two different things. So, I often have, more than on any other story, or sort of theme I've grappled with throughout my career, I have great difficulty in separating is from ought when I write about this situation, and have to guard myself against not just wishful thinking, but thinking that other people are seeing the same thing I'm watching and interpreting it the same way. So watching Trump do that 39-minute sort of playlist, with him swaying in sort of eerie ways to Pavarotti singing Ave Maria and stuff like that, to my mind, is another piece of evidence that Trump's cognitive disintegration, it continues apace. But to another person, it could be, isn't that guy cool? He's such a benign person. He just wants everybody to have fun. And, he helped the people who fainted, etc. I cannot, imagine looking at it that way, but I do know, not just from data, but from talking to people, to Trump people, as in Trump voters or supporters, that a lot of people just filter out what we find, say, outrageous and should find outrageous, threats to enemies, talks of traitors, etc., like that. They just see it, that's just his shtick. That's just him. Stop taking him so seriously. So I'm suspicious that policing the is ought line is much more difficult than I've ever experienced.
Well, I totally understand that, but let's take other elements from the past 24 hours. First, you had the weird dancing thing. Secondly, he then skipped 2 interviews, one on CNBC, plus another on a podcast. Then, this is yesterday, he went to the Chicago Economic Club, and a number of questions were posed very responsibly to him by the editor of Bloomberg. And Trump either didn't answer, lied, deflected, or in some cases said just complete and utter nonsense. I mean, I don't think he answered one single question with a coherent, economically sound answer. And, so it's performances like that also, make this fitness issue a little bigger as we head into the home stretch here. Or don't you agree?
I think it should. But I also think, I know Chicago quite well. And I've been to that, the Economic Club of Chicago. I've been to many events there. I think if you're like a senior executive at Northern Trust or something, or working at the Chase Manhattan Center there, or one of the types of people who would go and listen to Trump, you might think he's all these things. You might share exactly what you've just summarized, with which I agree, and still think, the guy's going to keep capital gains tax low. He's going to cut corporate taxes. He's going to hit consumers, not me, with these tariffs. And, he's probably, exaggerating anyway. But, he's way better for my bottom line than Kamala Harris. That's what, these are conservative people. And they could share all the moral outrage and democratic angst that we have legitimately about Trump. They could find him to be mentally in decline and to be just a repugnant character, despicable, as Mitch McConnell called him. But as Mitch McConnell did, continue to support him. I'm not at all trusting of how I see this or how you see this as being necessarily predictive of what's going to happen on November the 5th.
Okay, well, as far as doubting your own judgment, that's fine. But doubting my judgment, it's a bridge too far. But we've also had in the past week the Bob Woodward book, and the statement from General Mark Milley about Trump's dangerousness, saying that at his core he is a fascist. I mean, not mincing words. Milley is known for liking to speak, but that's a very strong statement. Also in the midst of this thing, which could arguably, you had Trump this week saying that liberals were the enemy within, and that we should consider, or we might have to consider using the National Guard or the military to suppress them. And interestingly, I thought kind of brilliantly, Kamala Harris in an event said, let's go to the tape. Let's look at him. Instead of characterizing what he was doing, she just said, look at him, draw your own conclusions. And it was very strong, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And again, all true. But look, fascism has been good for business through history. So, businesses, being told this guy's a fascist.
Is that the motto of the FT?
The fascism's good for business?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should ask that. But in 1932, I think, or might have been 3 or 4, the FT, I dug this out, the FT had a special supplement on Signor Mussolini's Italy. And it was like the most praiseworthy. It was like the guy doesn't just get trains to run on time, but this is a disciplined labor force and companies are thriving. But, fascism and business have a long history. But yeah, I mean, his threats, to people who oppose him. There's just absolutely no excuse for anybody in any position in life, whether they're in business or, living in a homeless shelter, for not knowing what Trump would do if he got power. And one of the things I wrote, Regain Power, one of the things I wrote about in that column you kindly mentioned is if he got a trifecta. Because if he wins the presidency, which is, let's say, 50-50, then I think there's already a 3 and 4 chance he'll take the Senate and would probably retain the House. If he has that trifecta, plus he's got the judiciary, this 6-3 Supreme Court is in his corner. What would happen would be an American passage towards an American version of fascism. I have no doubt about it.
And would you stay here and write as one of those heroic writers that lines up with the freedom fighters and is behind the lines, risking death on an hourly basis? Or would you become the FT's South of France correspondent?
I think it would be journalistically very eccentric to leave a story that's getting that dramatic. So I would be here. I might change my name and dye my hair orange or something like that. But,
this is Ed Luce. The Financial Times is steamship correspondent reporting from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in the Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. And this would be a Wi-Fi Titanic. It would be a modern Titanic.
Yeah.
So my reports would come out. But no, I mean, I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen, and that's the source of my anxiety. It could well be that not only does Kamala Harris win, but she somehow manages. Cruz loses. Sherrod Brown retains Ohio. Tester just clings on, and she regains the House too. Then we could have a really interesting and constructive period of domestic reform with a Democratic trifecta, and so that's also a possibility. And I've never really known. Have you? I mean, David, can you think of any sort of 3-week period where the divergent paths we could be taking are so far apart? Bob Dole versus Clinton. I mean, that was really dramatic, right? I mean, 96, obviously. The whole world was on tenterhooks.
The whole world was on tenterhooks. I don't think there has been one. The reality is that it probably was one in 2016. And we didn't know it quite as clearly. I mean, we may have suspected it. And the reality is, of course, it almost certainly was one in 2000. And again, we didn't know it because by Gore conceding, he sort of opened up this period of the expansion of the court, which is one of the big legs of this stool. And, all the events of the past 25 years have really flowed out of that. But in terms of consciously coming to a fork in the road, nothing has been quite as dramatic as this. I quite agree with you. Although, we do have your home country to look at, and they dumped the conservatives for Labor government, and both of them offered chaos. So, sometimes you think you're getting, very different outcomes, and maybe you're not.
The flavor of chaos. Do you want hazelnut twirl? Do you want chocolate mint chip? But it's not, it's not grandly impactful on the rest of the world. What happens in Britain?
Yeah, no. And by the way, hazelnut swirl is one thing. Brutal fascist oppression is a less pleasant flavor. And Britain has already collapsed and ceased to be an international power of note. The U.S. hasn't done that yet, so that would have a big consequence, I think.
So much to look forward to.
No doubt about it. Well, I mean, it's 20 days to go. And some people will be listening to this. It'll be 19 days to go. And the question is, can either of the candidates do anything to shake away from this knotted race? I don't think it's a knotted race. By the way, I'm going to just tell you what I think. You didn't ask, but then you're not moderating this, so why would you ask?
I want to know.
Yeah, no, I can tell. I can tell. But I think Kamala Harris is going to win the popular vote. I think she'll win by closer to Joe Biden margin than Hillary Clinton margin. I think she's going to win the electoral vote because she's going to win the 3 blue wall states, the extra district in Nebraska. And I predict she will win one other state. I don't know whether it's North Carolina, Georgia, something else. But I think there's one other battleground state she will win. So I think she'll be in the 290 to 300 seat range. I think the Democrats will win the House. They only have to flip 4 seats to take the majority in the House. I think you'll then have Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries. But I think it's going to be more than 4, might be 10, might be 15 seats. And the Senate is, in my view, a coin flip. It's probably more likely that it's +1 or +2 Republicans than it is +1 or +2 Democrats. But it's all possible. Sherrod Brown looks, like he'll probably win, but John Tester doesn't, right? So, it's going to be a tough one. So I don't know. I mean, you may want to just critique my analysis.
I think both of us can unite in joyous passion in hoping for Ted Cruz's defeat.
Did you watch any of that debate last night?
I did.
And was it entertaining for you?
I was entertained.
The first time in your life you were rooting for an NFL player?
Well, there's been one or two other. I mean, I won't expose my ignorance by trying to reply to that, but yeah, probably. I thought Colin
Howard kicked Ted Cruz's butt pretty clearly.
Oh, he did. So I've got to watch the whole thing. I saw choice clips, but Ted Cruz looked uncomfortable, which isn't his sort of natural facial repose. I do agree. I do agree that it could happen. I honestly think there's a sort of 3 weeks is the last 3 weeks has historically been really, really important to the outcome of elections. People talk of the October surprise, and there's a great Jeff Greenfield piece on this in Politico. People talk about the October surprise, but it's really the late October surprise, and in some cases, the first week of November surprise. So we have, if you think of the Bin Laden tape being released a few days before the 2004 election and the damage that did to Kerry in a close election. If you think back to 1980 when Carter and Reagan were neck and neck until 10 days before polling day. And he goes through a lot of these examples that it's late October, early November. So something's going to happen.
The Comey letter comes to mind.
The Comey letter is obvious in 2016. Something's going to happen in the next 3 weeks that most likely will change this, will tip this one way or the other. And by, today's standards, tipping one way or the other is a 1% move.
What is it? What is going to happen, Ed?
I don't know. I mean, we've been saying all year, and this has been to some extent happening this October, that the Middle East is the October surprise. We have yet to see Israel's response to Iran. I suspect Biden has done good work this week on restraining Netanyahu with this 30-day thing on Gaza, but also with this THAAD missile protection system that must have come at a price. So I suspect Biden has, been trying to buy off any nasty surprise from the escalation from the Middle East in the remaining 3 weeks of October, hopefully beyond that too, for the sake of the Middle East. But in terms of this election, that seems to be what he's done. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. In fact, I think that, it hasn't really gotten a lot of coverage, but everybody expected right after the Iranians launched 180 projectiles at Israel that the Israelis could respond right away, and that they were going to pick targets like nuclear facilities or oil. And we talked about it here on the podcast. And here we are now a couple of weeks later, and it hasn't happened. And it's not an accident. The U.S. government has been really actively pressing them diplomatically to wait. And they have been successful in the degree that they've done that. They've gotten a concession from the Israeli government that they will not attack nuclear sites or oil, and they will limit their targets to military sites. That's a concession that is both, a success diplomatically, but it also has the potential ability to contain the consequences of the attack when it does come by focusing on military targets and by reducing the risk of civilian casualties or some big blow to the Iranian economy that would force the government to take a bigger action, right? So all those things have happened. That's look, Gaza's a mess. I was just talking to our friend Jeremy Kanindijk, who runs Refugees International. I just had lunch with him. And, what's going on in northern Gaza is another humanitarian catastrophe waiting to happen. Things in Lebanon are in grievous shape. So, U.S. diplomacy is not working everywhere. But at least with regard to this Iran slice, and this THAAD missile defense system has some earmarks of learning from our experience, because it's not a bunch of fighter planes. It's not a bunch of bombs. It's a defensive weapon, which seems calculated in a variety of ways to, minimize backlash against the support, but to provide the Israelis with something extremely vital and appropriate given what the Iranians did. So I don't know if I think they've been handling the post-Iranian attack on Israel pretty well.
They have, and, better late than never in terms of trying to shape Netanyahu to behave in ways that won't harm us or others. But better late than never. What other potential late October surprises should we be fearing?
How did this happen? How did this turn into me? But, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I think you could end up with one or more, a flurry of kind of deep fakes or sort of manufactured scandals or rumors akin to those that followed Hurricane Helene. Where they were like, oh, the Democrats did this because they're trying to steal the lithium. And it seems cuckoo to you or me. But in a bunch of battleground states with a bunch of key audiences, it's not cuckoo. And I think there's every reason to expect that in the next 3 weeks, we're going to see a multiple of incidents like that from what we've seen in the past few weeks. And that strikes me as potentially one. I also, and here, your natural realism probably serves you better than my childlike optimism. But I think Trump's a mess. I truly think he's a mess. I don't think he's capable of conducting himself in the pressure of this campaign without doing some other thing that is as weird or disturbing as what we saw the dance performance the other night, but much more grave in its consequences. And so I think Trump contains within him an October surprise.
I hope so. I think, grab him by the pussy. That was also a late October surprise that didn't really change anything, partly because the Comey stuff, the Wiener laptop broke later, but and the email dump, the Russian hacking. I think we've known everything we need to know about Trump for many, many years. And he's got a floor of support there of about 46%, and it can go up to sort of 48, 49. And that almost no evidence, when he said originally I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, I'm not sure that isn't true, literally. And nobody would stop supporting him. And so I'm wondering what it could be, what Trump could do that would actually change anybody's minds. Surely the proverbial jury has come back infinite times in multiple parallel universes, and nothing has shifted. That bedrock of Trump's support is just there. So I have to say I'm very skeptical that Trump can do anything that would change people's minds.
Well, he may not. Frankly, my optimism about the way things are going to turn out is based on the knowledge that his floor and his base are very close together. His ceiling and his floor are very close together. And that Kamala Harris has got a much higher upside because she's not known. And we're in the post-Roe period where Democratic turnout and voting has outperformed polls for the last several years. And the Georgia turnout and stuff suggests maybe we're still in that. So that's another reason. And here's the one, you've mocked me for my pro Kamala Harris views for a long time now, and I want to give you another opportunity because in my mind, I look at her campaign from letting Biden make his decision without seeming to meddle, stepping up within hours, uniting the party, make it so there were no other candidates, winning the nomination, picking a good VP, running a good convention, coming out there with a good message that's different from Biden and different from Trump, of joy and positive energy and a new generation, hitting a period of the past few weeks of engaging with the media in a big way and great debate performance, and also putting out an agenda kind of on a daily basis of new items so that it's pretty rich agenda. So that here we are 20 odd days away from the election and sort of 70 plus days into the campaign. I don't think she's made a wrong move. I mean, we can debate some nuances of policy or whatever, but I don't think I've ever seen a political campaign, and knock wood, spit, if this happens tomorrow, it's my fault, that has been so gaff and screw up free. as hers has been thus far, and I see no reason why that's going to change. And so that gives me, given Trump's volatility, that gives me some hope.
Yeah, look, I mean, you're making me feel sort of less, less, a little bit less worried about this election than before we started talking. And I agree, her ceiling's way higher than Trump's. A lot's just going to boil down to little imponderables about turnout and stuff, and mood amongst Michigan voters. And I wouldn't sort of dare to forecast that. But
are you going out into the hinterlands to your favorite diners? Are you going to?
I am. Yeah, I've been going back and forth. I'll go out again next week. And it teaches me about America, but it doesn't really give me more sort of certainty about what's going to happen. But I don't think Kamala Harris has messed up at all. I mean, if you were sort of to pick one criticism, it would be still a little bit too word salady, but that's a very secondary theater sort of criticism. I don't think it massively impacts how people look at her. She's clearly very competent, very intelligent, a very attractive personality, has the guts and the spine to be commander-in-chief. She's sane. She made a good selection of vice president. She made mincemeat of Trump in the debate. And she would make, I think, mincemeat of him in a second debate. And I do think they ought to be sending chickens round to follow him everywhere he goes. To shame him into agreeing to a second debate. So I don't disagree with anything that you've just said. I'm just nervous because, that's who I am. I wake up anxious.
Well, look, I look forward to your reports. Ed goes out into the hinterlands of the United States, and you'll often see the byline, Ed Luce, hinterlands, and then it'll say, like, here I am. I've spent the past 3 days at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, where I interviewed many of the staff.
I've only the FT the Four Seasons in Chicago. It used to be the Econo Lodge, Woodlawn, something like that.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Englewood.
That's how Sanger would do it.
The sleeping.
Sanger, he would like when we asked him to join this episode, so I'm just saying this to coax him into joining us. But you remember, he'd like, oh yeah, here I am on the banks of Lake Geneva in the presidential suite, which is reserved for New York Times correspondents.
That's stuck in my memory.
That's not the Econo Lodge in Woodlawn, huh?
Yeah.
We will obviously each and every week look forward to your updates from wherever the heck you are. It has been very nice of you to devote yourself not only to the podcast, but to carrying all of its weight on your shoulders with Rosa and Corey being elsewhere. I would promise to make sure the burden is not so great in the future, but I enjoyed it. So thanks a lot. And we'll talk to you soon. And everybody out there, keep listening each and every day. Today's Wednesday, so tomorrow we've got our political gang, Simon Rosenberg, Tara McGowan, and so forth. And I think that'll obviously be very interesting to you. And of course, we have all of our usual podcasts, Kavita Patel and Norm Ornstein with Words Matter. We've had our Intel podcast. We've got our defense podcast coming up. We've got a Scylla Consciousness, really interesting Scylla Consciousness coming up on AI policy. So join us for all those. Join us for the daily where we review the news. Basically, we talk about all the pandas, and we'll see you again here real soon. Oh, and become a member if you're not a member. Until later, bye-bye.